So, hey, Chris, we're here to talk about open banking around the world. It's clearly a global phenomenon now, and it's coming in Brazil. I think that's a huge opportunity for the Brazilian market to build on some of the learnings from elsewhere. So, I guess first question to you, why are standards so important in open banking?
Well, I think if we didn't have standards and if banks didn't all build to the same standard, then it would be incredibly difficult for fintechs to connect. It would just make it painful and difficult for the market to really take off. And what we've seen in the UK is that we had the fortune of mandating a standard for the largest financial institutions, and we've seen the UK market really start to take off in that regard. And when you compare that with the rest of Europe, where yes, there are standards, but they're not as tightly defined, and there's no specific requirement for banks to follow in any particular standard, that just makes it much, much harder. And you can read any one of a number of reports from fintechs who've tried to connect to 6,000 banks across Europe, and it's difficult. So I think it's important not only that there's a standard, but that the standards that exist are much more aligned. One phrase I would use to any market looking at open banking is, please don't reinvent the wheel. You know, we've got a huge number of banks who are, many of them global banks, who've already built to a common standard now. We've got a huge number of technology companies and vendors out there who provide technology in this space, and they've built to standards. So if you're reinventing the wheel and trying to come up with your own standard or something that's a non-standard based approach, it's just going to create extra cost, extra delays, extra risk for everyone involved.
Yeah, no, I agree. And as we've gone through the implementation in markets like the UK, what do you think are some of the biggest pain points we've seen, and particularly for banks implementing APIs?
So looking at the UK, where we did have a common standard, I think, you know, banks struggled initially to implement their APIs according to that standard. So one of the things that's happened in the UK, in conjunction with the OpenID Foundation, is developing a set of conformance tools and a certification process. And that's super important because when you've got banks all building to a common standard, and not only doing that, but testing consistently and certifying to that standard, then there's kind of proof points that this has been done properly. And again, you know, I think that's a key learning for other markets, that building conformance and certification into the process from day one, rather than assuming that every bank's going to do it properly. And I think you know, you've got to be quite tough on that, whether it's from a regulatory point of view or from a commercial point of view, probably a bit of both. It makes enormous sense to have that baked in from day one. Conformance tools that are common tools that everyone can use, and a strong certification process. And the other kind of key pain point I think that we've seen is discoverability. So how do third parties know where banks are? How do banks know who the third parties are? And having some central directory, I think, is really important in that. In the UK, we have that. There are a number of other competing directories across Europe, but I don't think they go far enough. You know, there's a lot more that these central directories could do in terms of aiding discoverability, providing really granular information about what APIs are available in a sort of catalog or marketplace type scenario. And I think that's something that in the UK, in Europe, and in any other market is really important, and would really help accelerate, not just accelerate the growth, but also provide and keep trust in the ecosystem as well.
Yep. Yeah, I agree.
So I've got a couple of questions for you. So I mean, obviously we've seen open banking starting to take off in the UK, as we've just discussed, but what are the key, or what are the big use cases that we're starting to see? What are the ones that have really been the first ones to go, that have got actual customers using them?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think, I mean, we'd both agree we're still sort of at the end of the beginning of the whole open banking journey, but things are starting to really take off in the UK. We've got about 240 active participants in the ecosystem now. We're seeing about 435 million API calls a month. The first use cases, you probably, as you expect, are pretty simple. So there's a whole series of use cases around helping customers manage their money more effectively. So personal financial management tools, and in the business space, integrations with cloud accounting platforms, so businesses can see everything in one place and manage their money. Another really big area has been around lending and onboarding new customers. So using that access to banks to help simplify application processes and use all of that financial information to make better lending decisions. Interestingly, it's having a really positive impact on financial inclusion. So that financial management, cloud accounting, onboarding are the real high volume use cases, but there's a really broad range of different use cases starting to emerge now.
So up until now in the UK and Europe, this has all been a regulatory driver. There's quite a lot of talk around two things. One is this concept of premium APIs, banks being able to do more with their APIs, and the other is kind of banks looking to build on what they've created and monetize it in other ways. What's next? What are the kind of really big use cases you see coming in the UK and Europe, and what does that mean for other markets like Brazil?
Yeah, well, I think you're right in mentioning the regulatory start point. To be honest, the regulation really just creates a start line. It certainly isn't the end point. I think we'll see banks building much richer services available via APIs so that they can start to build deeper propositions with partners, enable much richer functionality. I mean, we see that in other industries. Look how far Google Maps is used in all sorts of different platforms. And I think banks can deliver functionality that gets embedded in different channels and platforms in similar ways. I think the two really interesting areas, a lot of the first use cases are around information. I think it's when you start combining information with, so that financial information with identity data, and combining all of that with payments as well, we'll start to really see this get exciting. So truly embedded commerce with the right information so a customer can simply onboard and make a payment in one click in a platform environment. I think we'll see things really start to escalate. So two areas I expect banks to look to leverage really from a premium perspective, definitely identity and payments sitting around that core of financial information. So yeah, I think we're at the beginning. The banks are starting to look at this, but it's still really early days. So a year or so's time, I think there'll be a really exciting commercial layer sitting on top of those regulatory minimums.
So I think that's the holy grail, isn't it? You know, good stuff that's good for customers, good for fintechs, and good for banks as well. And I think if you can get all those three, and if the market gets excited about that, I think there's some great learnings there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a challenge for Brazil, right? How do we do that faster, cheaper, better than all of the other markets around the world? Anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Huw.